and welcome to the second episode of Leading Age Virginia's podcast, Voices in Leadership. I'm so excited to have our special guests today, and I'm going to start with Judith Trumbo. Judith, hi, thanks for being here, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, thank you, Melissa. Laura, who's with us too. We're super excited to be part of this. So thank you guys for this creative idea and for supporting women in leadership. As Melissa said, I'm Judith Trumbo, and I am the President and CEO of Virginia Mennonite Retirement Community here in Harrisonburg. We're a community of about 750 residents for persons who want to age well and live fully. And we say our mission is to be a community of hope, meaning, and growth for persons to age well and live fully. And I just want to say that includes employees too, not just residents. That's really critical to our mission. So I've been in home and community health care for goodness, most of my career. I'm a nurse by background, have an MBA, but really my passion is around leadership and particularly how we grow leaders. So I appreciate that perspective from Leading Age and was part of what allowed me to meet Laura, who I would love to introduce if that's okay, Melissa.
Yeah, absolutely. Go for it.
All right. So with us today is Laura Toni-Holsinger. She's the Executive Director of the Harrisonburg, Rockingham County United Way. And I was telling Melissa in Laura's hearing prior to when we started this podcast that she is one of the best leaders of any gender. I have learned so much from her, and I may be showing my bias here, but I always I never appreciated when people said, well, you're the first woman who did this, or you're the first woman who did that. I'm like, is this about my gender or is this about my competence? So I will say that I appreciate Laura's competence and in specific, some of her life stories this last 5 years and her ability to communicate. So Laura, I set you up.
What else am I supposed to say? Thank you.
Really, we'll just close this now.
That's a very kind introduction. Thank you. Yeah, I've served as the executive director of our United Way for over 7 years now. It's my first executive director opportunity and something I had always sort of set my eyes on. I didn't really know what organization I would lead first, but when this opportunity came around, it felt like the right fit. And I'd like to say that it has been. I've certainly grown a lot in it. But at United Way, and a lot of people are familiar with United Ways, although I like to say if you've met one United Way, you've met one United Way. Although we all have a lot of overlap, what we do here is we focus on what I like to call the power of 1 + 1 = 3, which is that we can accomplish way more together than any one of us can on our own. And so we try to look at issues in the community from a kind of a 30,000-foot view and pay attention to where there are gaps, where we can make more effective connections, and who we can engage to have more effective solutions.
So, in the first of our podcast series, we focused on mentoring and specifically female to female mentoring. And our first guest talked about how it started as mentoring and then it really grew from there. And it started as mentor-mentee, and that relationship kind of shifted as the years went by. So my first question is just, could you tell us how you met? I mean, I assume it was professionally, but share that. And then, what really drew you to each other to create more of a deeper relationship?
I love to hear Laura start on that. I have kind of a backstory that I've never told her. So this is kind of like one of those TV shows, where you come out.
You beat me to it. I was going to hear your story first, but I will start. So we met in a more formal mentoring program called the BOLD program, which is Building Optimal Leaders by Design. It's run by our Chamber of Commerce, and they pair young leaders with seasoned leaders in the community. And I was really excited, and I think it was only in my second year at United Way to get to be a part of the program, and thrilled when I heard that Judith was going to be my mentor, because she's someone that I had certainly admired from afar. And I know she's a well-respected leader in our community, and she'd actually been the board chair at United Way prior to my arrival. And so it was nice to know that, you know, she had a lot of really meaningful context to the work that I was embarking on. But one thing that I know, I think this is part of what Judith is going to share about, like, the first time that we met. I know she talks about how introverted I was.
Okay.
But I feel like my version of that is I was like slightly intimidated by like her success and her leadership and wanting to say the right things. I think we got over that quickly, but I'll hear your version, Judith.
Well, Laura, I just want to say I felt the same way when I met Judith, and when she asked me to come work with her board years ago, I was so like humbled and nervous, because she's just the type of person that you want to bring your best self. Yeah. When you're working with her or impacting her community in any way. So I totally understand where you were coming from with that moment of, oh my gosh, right?
Well, Melissa, if it helps, I still remember your presentation and kind of draw on it. So I don't remember what you wore, but I'm sure it was fabulous.
I was pregnant. I was like 8.5 months pregnant.
Probably
so I wore a tent.
As I was at that point. Yeah. Well, I might just say, yeah, Laura did kind of, I did think when Laura and I first had the opportunity to interact, because I had known that she was a very strong leader and had come to the United Way following Betsy Hay, who works here at VMRC now, and with a very strong reputation. But I do remember saying to Betsy, I hope this works, because I don't know if she's going to say anything. But Laura's right. It only took us, oh goodness, 15 minutes, and we were off to the races. So, and again, it was, as Laura reflected, through the BOLD program. And they had it set up in a pretty structured way, but I think Laura and I were able to take that kind of off those rails and into what really worked for us. And as not years, as the months went on, I found we were leading together. You know, I found myself following at some points, and I found myself leading at some points. But over the years, what I have learned from Laura, and because of our relationship, I probably, Laura, for better or for worse, spent more time observing you and trying to see how I can emulate her as well, particularly some of the way she communicates, which I think is very effective, and her systematic approach with excellence to issues that arise, and her commitment to getting collaboration within our community. So those have been exceptional learnings from my perspective.
Judith, I'm sorry, Laura, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to add something. I've not shared this before, but sort of joking about that first interaction. And I remember the first time you shared that with me, obviously it was like after we had a more established relationship, but it really has made me think about like how I present myself, right, when I meet somebody, right? It's not about dominating conversation or like having to like spout your resume or be impressive, if you will. But I think not having been in this kind of position before, and I feel like a lot of women come from this standpoint, I was always sort of like looking for somebody else to take the lead, and that doesn't have to be the case. Again, it's not about like saying more words or dominating a conversation, but it has helped me to think more through like, how can I more quickly connect with whoever it is I'm talking to, right, at a networking event or whatever the context is. So that has really helped me to grow as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I often catch when somebody says, what do you do? I'll say, I run a nonprofit. Well, that's not actually what I do, right? You know, I mean, right. I'm president and CEO of Leading Age Virginia. But do you think that hesitancy is inherently female? Or, I mean, where do you, I mean, I don't want you to diagnose me, or maybe I do, but, you know, where do you think that comes from?
No, I agree with that, Melissa, and I have found it difficult to say I'm president and CEO of a large retirement community as if somehow that's bragging. Yeah. And women leaders, well, girls, you know, don't brag, don't make yourself appear more. And for goodness sakes, don't be bossy. You know,
Right.
I learned that when I was in kindergarten, because believe me, I was the boss of everything.
We're shocked, aren't we?
But yeah, to kind of semi-diminish one's role, when in reality, what we bring to the table is gender aside. I mean, we are smart, intelligent, capable, articulate women who have a lot to offer.
Yeah. Yeah. So let me circle back to the question I was going to ask both of you. So the first is, Judith, what made you want to be in a formal mentor role through the BOLD program?
Yeah, good question. So I think I was asked to do it. And if I can say yes, I want to be able to say yes when it comes to particularly to developing leaders. And if it's consistent with how I want to grow, because those mentor relationships help me grow. And to Laura's point about self-awareness and how you show up, those mentor relationships help to define that. So I'm not inclined to just participate with whatever, but this was a well-established program too.
And Laura, how about you? What made you raise your hand and say, I want to be mentored?
Yeah, I always love opportunities like that. I heard from a leader of a previous organization I had worked for who talked about how you can never have enough mentors, right? It doesn't mean you have 50, but right, it's also not that you just have one, right? It's not this like monogamous relationship. And you can have mentors in different parts of your life, and coming into this new position and knowing that being well connected in the community was also part of how I and United Way were going to be successful. I knew that this was something that was going to help me develop, and learning from people like Judith who have had experience in the community, who are already well-established leaders and also were familiar with our work, was not just going to benefit my own growth, but the work that we do here at United Way.
So what were the elements? You mentioned that, the BOLD program is a formal program. And that there were elements of that kind of that guided your relationship. And then there were other things that, as you got to know each other, became important as part of your relationship. So can you just share what some of those different elements of this have been for you?
Yeah, so it was good that they had put in some structure for those mentor and mentees that may have had a little bit of difficulty connecting or kind of knowing what to talk about. So there was some guided discussions. They paired us with another mentor, mentee. And then there were, I believe, Laura, weren't there quarterly meetings of the entire group? So you could learn from other leaders in the community too. And the one that I remember most significantly was when leaders on a panel talked about some of the darker moments, some of the failings, and how that impacted their careers. And Jack Broadus, who was then the CEO of Sunnyside, I mean, I had not heard his story, but the room was silent to hear him talk about a difficult time in his career. I mean, over about a 6-month period, as I recall, and then how that propelled him how that got him to Sunnyside and propelled him from there. So that was really impactful. Laura might remember others.
Yeah, I mean, I love the structure of that, as Judith said, because it allowed you to point back to something that you could then discuss the next time you met one-on-one. And we certainly used that, but we didn't hold very, super strictly to it. It kind of just opened the door for maybe more targeted conversation that always led very naturally to connections to both of our work, which I always found really valuable.
Yeah, in our leadership academy, and having gone through the national academy, we call those stepping stones, right? So what are those big moments that have caused your life to go one way or another? And I remember sitting in my first academy experience with my journal and writing, 5 to 7 stepping stones and then sharing them in a triad. And just, there's so much power in that authenticity and that vulnerability, right? To take that moment to say, who you see, there's so much behind that, right? That has helped me develop into the leader I am. And I wouldn't be the leader that I am had it not been for some of those really dark moments. But that's not easy. It's not easy to share in a group. It's not necessarily easy to share one-on-one. And I know this past year and a half, I hoped to say it was all in the past, but it's not. The leading through pandemic, both your organizations that you're leading, and then having to balance your family life, your personal life. So, a couple questions around that. One, what has this relationship, mentor, mentee, friends, colleagues, meant through the pandemic? And then, how just some of the lessons that you've learned over the past 18 months. I know we've all learned a lot. So just, Laura, starting with you.
Yes.
Yeah. I've always taken on the philosophy of being very people first with the teams that I lead, and in the least cliche way possible, and making sure everyone has what they need to take care of themselves. And obviously we have a job to do and the work is important, but if they can't take care of themselves or don't feel like they have what they need to do that, then it's harder to focus on our jobs. And I think that was even more important in this last year, and then, especially with the work we do, and right, Judith can relate to this kind of from a different standpoint in the population that she serves, but we suddenly were receiving, a significant number of requests for assistance of people who were losing housing or didn't know how to pay their bills, or so it was like our work was being multiplied, and we were all also dealing with our own kind of reactions to the stress of all of this, of the unknown, the just kind of the worry and the continued changing landscape of what was happening even to date, right, of all that's happening with the Delta variant. So again, I think as a leader, it just helped me to kind of try to stay focused on my people and make sure that they felt supported, and also really trying to model that in how I was taking care of myself. We were never a super hard 9-to-5 office, but at the same time, I think that was sort of our default, right? Because that felt normal. But what I think a lot of leaders have learned, and again, this might vary by office and sector, is that people can be really productive from home, that good people that feel like their needs are being met are going to work hard for what their job is, or, to do their job, I should say. Anyway, so I think that's a few things that I've seen and learned. And while I wish I could say we're like coming out of all of this, right, it's like re-emphasizing those themes now as these sort of stresses are heightened. I mean, right, I've got school-age kids, and I like going into last school year was stressful, and I thought maybe going into this school year would be less stressful, but now there's like other things to worry about, or sort of new versions of the things to worry about. So anyway, never underestimating also just kind of the weight that can add to anybody.
How about you, Judith?
Yeah, and one thing I just want to run back to Laura that she didn't mention was she started a group called Vigilant in the Valley to respond to COVID. So her leadership in that has been very effective, and I think has demonstrated not only that you take care of people, but you take care of community as well. So perhaps if there is something I've learned, it's the importance of community, and something that we take for granted. I'm blessed to be able to come to work and have a relatively safe community. In some ways, we're in a bubble, and to have persons around that have become, over the last 18 months, my faith community in a more informal way when we weren't going to church. And perhaps the biggest thing I have found, I don't have school-age children, so I don't have to worry about them. My husband is relatively, well, he's self-sufficient and he's not high maintenance. I need to give that to him. So I've had more time for reflection, and something I did not do previously was meditation. And I'm not talking, I'm not a big guru of that, but incorporating meditation and reflection has been really helpful. And then cultivating gratitude and hope, because as Laura said, if you don't take care of yourself, and that's not just physically and emotionally, but also spiritually, you're just not going to be able to be available to the rest of the persons that you lead in a way that can kind of come around, because that's, I think, something that's been really important these last 18 months is to come around and to support your team and trust your team too. As I say to new leaders who seem to inevitably fall into this trap, if you try to do it all, you get to do it all. So, you know, none of us is an island. Embrace your buddy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, you know, we learned, because we had to go back to basics, you know, last year, March, April, May, June, right? And, you know, I think about our neighborhood, looking out the window, and I didn't even know I had so many neighbors. I didn't know there were so many dogs in my neighborhood. People just didn't walk their dogs before, and they were out walking their dogs, right? And kids were playing in the streets, and, you know, socially distanced, of course. But, you know, so much of that we want to continue. And, you know, I at least for my staff, it's family first at all times. You know, the work will get done. But as you said, if you're not taking care of yourself and the people that you love are not taken care of, you can't be your whole self at work. And I don't think, and I think what you said, Laura, is really important, is that people feel that and then they work harder.
And I might just add, Melissa, that we need to acknowledge that the persons who are really providing the direct care, particularly in communities such as ours, become family to the residents in these days when, or in the times when visitation is not allowed. Right. And in all honesty, they give in a way that's family-like. And we don't have unlimited supply, so I want to acknowledge the sacrifice those persons have made. They can't always put their biological or however they define family outside of the community first. So I just think it's, yeah, I just want to acknowledge that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that as leaders in the field who are setting the tone and the culture of our organizations, you know, how do we enable our frontline staff to be able to go to their kids' soccer game, right? I mean, some of the opportunities that we're afforded because of the nature of our work versus the nature of their work. I think that is a huge area, a huge opportunity for growth. And I don't want to imply it's easy, because I don't think it is. But I think it is something that we've learned we have to think about. You know, how do we, like you said, Judith, how do we help our frontline who are doing the hardest jobs also be able to take that opportunity to, you know, go to the recital or whatever it is?
Laura did a fantastic op-ed piece for our local paper a couple years ago. Alice is one of the projects from United Way, and she can speak to that if she chooses. But the op-ed piece went into the difference in economic levels and what it takes for someone that may be in a direct care position to be transportation, time off to go to school. Laura, do you want to? I thought it really impacted me. It's provided really amazing perspective.
Yeah, in fact, I served on a panel earlier this week that was hosted by JMU that was focused on economic recovery for the region, and it was filled with 150 people, filled with primarily business leaders as well as a number of nonprofit leaders, and really all sectors were represented. And kind of what Judith's referring to, a big emphasis of the conversation around economic recovery was acknowledging what happens when people don't have those sort of foundational things that allow them to then be successful at work. Transportation, housing, childcare, and childcare in particular was something we talked a lot about And one of the things that I shared was, one, that we have treated childcare like a charitable endeavor for way too long, and that if we don't consider it an investment and as a core part of economic recovery, then we're going to continue to be where we are. And many of us have seen what happens when people don't have access to those things, but I think the pandemic has really shined a light on that, as well as a number of other issues that we could certainly spend a lot of time talking about. So yeah, and then I think, right, connecting it back to women and women in leadership, or really in any position, women are more likely to sort of bear the burden of a lot of those responsibilities, or figuring all of that out. And the data has showed that in terms of the number of women that have left the workforce in the last year and a half. And it's not just a like hop back in October sort of thing, right? There are years that are lost, even if it's technically 18 months. That definitely concerns me, because of, I think, a lot of the progress that we have made, and also what we lose by people feeling like they can't, like they had to choose.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah.
No, I mean, I think that, I mean, as you said, the data supports it. And you know, it's funny because we walk this fine line, of course. You know, some of the men in our membership are like, well, you know, when are you going to do men in leadership podcasts? And which is, I know, tongue in cheek, but our brains throughout the day do not compartmentalize, right? I mean, I'll speak for myself. So as I'm here talking to you, I'll hang up and I'll have to book the, you know, the birthday party venue, and I'll have to make sure that the vaccinations are up to date for the dog. And I still have to get bread and milk, you know, and then I'll go into another meeting, right? So, you know, and I'm not picking on my husband, but he's a wonderful man. But from the hours of 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., he doesn't think anything about anything except his job. You know, he wasn't there when the tooth came out yesterday, right? Like that bloody battle was mine and mine alone. Thank you very much. And I'm not saying that to criticize him, but it's not just that he doesn't have to think from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. He's just not, he's able to focus 100% on work. And I am wearing so many hats. I don't know, tell me if that resonates with you, or if I alone feel that I have to kind of go back and forth throughout the day. In those different circles of my life.
Yeah, I mean, you know, my husband and I actually talk about this a lot, because I think we both recognize that our male peers, his and my male peers, are less likely to have to do sort of half the work, if you will. Not that it always has to be like 50-50. That's just not how life often works. But and then sort of recognizing the opportunities that can open up if you're somebody that can just be 100% your job, right? And I'm grateful that in my marriage, you know, that we do have a really good balance of that. But it's interesting, you know, and I do see that a lot here, you know, again, in male counterparts of mine, knowing that sometimes that's not, they have a different situation than I do, but I'm still trying to, you know, work just as hard to sort of be where they are, or be in the room where they are, if you will. And again, I think in general, more women, I think, have additional hurdles to jump to sort of get to that same finish line.
Judith, do you?
Yeah, I'm sitting here listening, and I'm kind of pondering, because I think that there's value in having a more balanced or perspective than just your work. So some ways I think of it as a much more well-rounded approach to life.
Yeah.
Because if it's only about work, or only about advancing in your career, think about all you missed along the way. You miss those. Yeah. So I'm just pondering that. I don't think you can have it all. And, but I do believe that you can incorporate pieces that are important. So I've said, for instance, that while I don't adhere to this as well as I've always would like to, is it's family, faith, and fitness, but it's also friends and fun. So how do you, that's like a stew. And if
Yeah.
all you had was meat in your stew, which is your job or whatever, that would be, well, I wouldn't eat it. You gotta have some veggies and some,
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I remember, we used to talk about work-life balance as if the scales ever, right?
Yeah.
It's just not.
Yeah.
And I think for anybody, there are times when it's work and it's
Yeah,
a lot of work.
absolutely.
And I think that as people who have worked through a pandemic, we all recognize, I know Judith, for the work that you do and the work that we did on the association side, it was 7 days a week. In the beginning, it was not letting up. And, thank God for Amazon, so that we would have, things that we needed coming to the house. And then there are times where you're, on vacation, you're out of pocket and it's 100%, the family, the fun, the friends. But it's really around integration and deciding from your values, what's most important to you. And then for we as leaders to understand for the people that we're leading, what's most important to them.
Yeah.
And how can we help create a culture where, they're able to access what's most important to them and still feel fulfilled at work, right? So they can feel fulfilled in both places. And remembering that not everybody is a mother and a wife, and there are other things that drive them. There are other things that round out their lives. And how can we honor those things and still be productive and do the work that's at hand? So I think that is always one of the challenges of leadership is to be able to role model and to be able to recognize that we don't all value the same things.
Yeah. And cultivating those relationships so that you have a better understanding of what it is. And if you're better rounded, then you can relate in a more engaged way. So Laura was getting ready to say something.
Oh yeah. I think also as a mom of young kids, I try to take an opportunity to always make sure my kids sort of know what I do. Right, to an extent, they're 5 and 9, almost 9. But I also have work that I can include them in sometimes, right? Sometimes they can volunteer with me or join me at something for work. I gave a school board presentation once when my husband was on the school board and I had to have both kids with me, and one didn't want to sit with my friend. And so I put him on my hip and I kept talking. Sometimes it's to that extent, although that's not always ideal. But, they know a little bit about what I do. And I think also that sets a great example that they're growing up where both their mom and their dad do work that's important. It doesn't mean that we ignore them and only focus on work. And then sometimes we all do that together. And I think those blurred lines can be a good thing. I'm also a huge stickler of I turn off my email and I don't do any work on vacation. So again, it's not like I'm always working, right? I don't always have it on the mind. I draw those clear boundaries, but you can't always do that. And that's just sort of life and some of the work we do. But I try to help make sure, my kids understand what that is and hope that they see that I find fulfillment in the work I do and that they'll find that someday too.
I love what you said there, Laura. When you're a younger leader, sometimes you feel like you have to be on 24/7, available 24/7, because who else is going to do it as well as you do? Who else?
Right.
And I have found through the years, that's one of the beauties of getting older, that, other people are just as capable as you are, Judith. And the graveyard is full of indispensable people. I forget who quoted that. It's either Churchill or de Gaulle or somebody, but.
Well, it's like you said before, right? What did you say? If you feel like you have to do it all, you get to do it all.
Yep.
And I'm not doing that, and I don't want the people around me to think that they have to try to do that either.
Bingo. Yeah.
Absolutely. So let me ask you one final question that I feel like we could talk forever. This
we could.
So enjoyable. And I've learned so much from the both of you. So thank you. If you had to give one piece of advice to your younger self, and define younger any way you want, whether it's your high school self, your college self, you're just coming out of college, whatever that younger self is, what piece of advice would you give her, knowing what you know now?
All right. Well, Laura thinks what St. Julian of Norwich, who I've learned to know about during the pandemic, said, all shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well.
I think I would say that you deserve a seat at the table. After my first my first couple months at United Way, I had a board member who very in a radical candor way, if you know what radical candor is, said, you need to stop prefacing things with, well, I've only been here for a couple months, but, and she was like, you are competent and you need to stop saying that because it dismisses everything that comes out of your mouth after that. And I was like, noted. And she was exactly right. But I think at varying points in my life, I have done that to myself and I need to not do that. And I think I've learned how not to, even if I say it in my head first, right? I don't let it come out of my mouth. So that's a step.
Well, thank you both for sharing your stories and your wisdom and your relationship with us. I know that everybody who listens is going to get lots of nuggets to help them in their burgeoning careers and lives. So I really appreciate you taking the time to be some of our voices in leadership for Leading Age Virginia. It's been awesome.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. It's so fun to reflect.
Wow. What did you think, Paula? I feel like I learned so much, and that there was so much more that I could have asked or would have asked if it weren't for running out of time.
I know. They were fabulous. Their nuggets of wisdom really resonated with me, especially Judith and her advice to the younger self, St. Julian of Norwich, because there's a saying that I always say, and I guess it comes from what she said, is, and all will be well, and all will be well. So that's what I always say to myself inside my head all the time is, okay, it's going to be okay, and all will be well, and all will be well. So yeah, I really love that. And especially her family, faith, fitness, and then adding the friends and the fun. That's been especially true throughout, the past year and a half. And for both of those women, how difficult it has been for them to really strive for that in the midst of all that everybody's been through. And they're in such a small community as well. So they really had to share with one another and share with the community all the things that they're going on.
Yeah, and I love the conversation that we had around, two things. One, the recognition that not everybody has a similar life to yours. So embracing that how people define a well-balanced life is going to be different for everybody. And then the second, really honoring the work of our frontline staff and the sacrifices that they had to make, particularly in the past 18 months, and how we as employers have to figure out how we can allow more balance for those individuals who are doing some of the hardest work, but not on that flexible timeline that those of us in different seats like you and me, we're afforded the opportunity to say, we need to cut out for a couple hours and we'll be back online later. But when you're given direct care and direct service, you don't have that luxury.
Right. I was reading actually an article today, and it talked about changing one's culture in your community. I mean, it starts with the leader saying, okay, I want this, but what do my staff need? How can I give it to them, so that they can be allowed to say what their culture is, so that they can have their own voice be heard. So, I mean, that's very relevant. And the other thing that really got to me was about the leadership of women leaders is don't diminish yourself, don't diminish your role. It's like, you are strong, you are capable, so put it out there.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, we had another wonderful conversation. I can't wait for our next. And Melissa Andrews and Paula Ropoleski saying thank you to Judith and Laura for being our voices in leadership, and we look forward to our next episode.